The bell tolled before dawn, not the triumphant ring of feasts or festival days, but a single, low note, dull and slow, heavy with cold. It sank into the stone like a forgotten oath, and was swallowed by the fog that curled through the cloisters, like old breath exhaled from the mouth of winter itself. The abbey did not wake. It drifted through frostbitten silence and shadowed halls. It merely endured. Beneath its arches, barefoot brothers moved in quiet procession, their forms like ghosts, stitched into wool, robes soaked at the hem, eyes hollow, lips pale from fasting. There was no speech, no need for it. Hunger had long since devoured the luxury of words. In the refectory, a single candle held its trembling vigil. Its light barely reached the edges of the room, and the flame leaned, tired, toward the cracked stone walls, as if the darkness had weight. The air carried a memory of old bread, wool damp from prayer sweat, and something fainter still, the dry scent of sanctity, or what had passed for it in these walls. Brother Elric sat alone at the long table, hunched in shadow. His hands were clasped tightly, knuckles white, fingers curling in on themselves, not in devotion, but in need. The prayer was muscle memory now, something done because to stop would invite the collapse of the mind. To speak aloud, even to himself, would break the illusion that this hunger had meaning. His stomach turned in on itself, slow and familiar. It was not a scream anymore, not even a whisper. It was a presence, a companion, an ache carved into the shape of faith. He had not spoken in 3 days. He had not tasted meat in 30. They said that holiness came through denial, that the flesh must be beaten, bent, and silenced like a blade made perfect by the hammer. The body, they claimed, was merely a vessel, and vessels must be emptied to be filled with grace. So Elric emptied himself, not for glory, not even, he suspected, for God, but because he no longer knew what it meant to stop. He tried. Once, to picture heaven, he imagined light, a table with warm bread, the sound of water, a mother's touch, or perhaps a sister's, someone whose eyes did not pass through him. But the vision crumbled quickly, replaced by the image of the crust the novices received, dry, thin, dipped in weak broth, and reverently consumed as if it were the Eucharist itself. Hunger had reduced paradise to crumbs, and still they called it devotion. The wind crept through, a shattered shutter in the scriptorium, low and needling. It stirred the frost on the stained glass until the fractured saints on the window began to move, not with grace, but like wounded things trapped behind colored glass. Their faces, twisted in the light, flickered across the floor like judgment or pity. Elric didn't move. Across the floor, from the darkness beneath the cupboard, came the rat, old, deliberate, dragging a strip of waxed linen in its yellowed teeth. Its claws tapped across the flagstones, slow and measured, like a monk fingering through a rosary. Tap, 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 dot. It did not fear Elric. It had learned, as all the abbey's vermin had, that these men were no threat. They moved too slowly now. Their hunger had stripped them of rage, even instinct. Elric watched it pass. He wondered, faintly, if the linen had once wrapped a wedge of cheese. That thought alone sent shame crawling up his spine. He pressed his palms together until his skin blanched white, as if pressure could drive the thought out. The fast would not end in triumph. There was no triumph here, only the quiet, shrouded collapse of those who had endured too long. Their bodies would be wrapped in old cloth, laid in the crypt behind the chapel wall, and the brothers would whisper, not prayers, but judgments, too weak, not enough faith. And then, before the sun rose fully, life would continue without them, as it always had. Still, Elric remained. The vow returned to his lips, thin as breath, quieter than the wind through the shutters. He spoke it not for glory, not for God, but because he had nothing else left to say. The vow was the only thing hunger had not taken. I remain, he whispered. Outside the sky lightened, not with gold, but with bone, a pale grey blue that offered no warmth. The light spread slowly, creeping over the cracked altar, the warped benches, the stone floor where the rat had disappeared once more into shadow. Elric rose. His legs ached. The movement summoned black stars to the edge of his vision. But he walked, slowly, toward the chapel. The brothers were gathering, for prime, voices low, robes brushing stone. 100 whispered prayers rising like smoke from cold lips. In the corner of the chapel, beneath the carved figure of St. John the Silent, one of the novices collapsed. His body hit the floor like a sack of flour. No one screamed. No one moved. Elric watched. A moment passed. Then two monks stepped forward, not in panic, but with weary routine. They lifted the boy's thin form and carried him gently, reverently, through the rear door, toward the infirmary, or perhaps the crypt. It was difficult to tell anymore. And still, the chanting did not stop. Domini labia mea ape. The words filled the chapel like dust. Not alive, but persistent. They coated the walls, the robes, the prayers. Elric knelt. The stone was hard beneath his knees, but he no longer felt it. He stared up at the crucifix above the altar, the figure of Christ hanging limp, ribs etched deep, eyes carved in agony, a mirror, a warning, a promise. He did not ask for release. He did not ask for mercy. He only asked to last the day, to not be the one. They carried next, and as the wind sighed through the high windows and the candlelight flickered, he wondered if the silence that followed death was finally quieter than this, but no answer came. Only the rustle of robes, the murmur of breathless devotion, and the soft thud of another monk collapsing in the dark. Still, Elric whispered, "I remain," and somewhere beyond the cloister wall, the first crow of morning cut the silence in two, sharp, black, and final. What follows is not light, but the hunger that comes after, the kind that clings to bone and memory and the soul itself. Snow fell without sound. It covered the courtyard in soft white, smoothing over the broken outline of the well, silencing the brittle groan of shutters in the wind, burying the faint prints of a barefoot novice who had passed minutes before. No bell called for mat. No voice echoed through the cloisters. Only silence, heavy, intentional. A silence not of peace, but of anticipation, the hush before a blade falls, or a soul breaks. Brother Oswin knelt in the cloister garden, facing the weather-worn crucifix carved into the stone wall. His robes had stiffened with frost, edges curled like dead leaves. Breath spilled from his lips in quiet clouds, vanishing quickly into the frozen air. Beneath him, the flagstones bit into his knees, but he did not shift. Stillness was part of the ritual. His rosary, worn nearly smooth, dangled from pale fingers, its once dark beads now faded, bone-like. His hands trembled faintly, not from cold, but from the emptiness clawing through his insides. Hunger had replaced his heartbeat. Each pulse felt like a hollow knock inside his ribs. He had taken the discipline the night before, not the lash, not this time. The abbot had offered him something more enduring, silence and starvation. A Sino spoken but understood, too proud, they said, too quick with the eye, too certain of his place in the choir. Now, he would eat nothing for 3 days, only thin broth for 7 after that. No pen, no scripture, no fire, just hunger and prayer, and time, a mercy, the abbot had whispered, before placing the iron key back on its hook, and Oswin had nodded, because the only other answer was exile. Now he remained kneeling in the cold, head bowed beneath the blind gaze of a crucified God who had suffered more, or so he hoped. The snow thickened, painting the garden white, flake by flake. Beyond the cloister wall, the sound of distant chanting rose and fell, muffled by stone, blurred by wind. The other brothers were inside, wrapped in wool and incense, lost in the safety of rhythm and ritual. But Oswin was outside, not as punishment alone, as witness to himself, to the vow he had broken, or perhaps the one he had not yet made. One by one, the others passed through the corridor behind him, robes brushing against stone, eyes fixed low. No words. Words were dangerous now. Words could carry doubt and pity. Worse than any sin, could unravel everything. He kept his gaze on the crucifix. A carved Christ, eroded by centuries of frost and sun, stared past him into the sky. The details of the face were gone now. The wood was dark with moss and old wax, but still, it watched. A black bird landed on the garden wall, its feathers puffed. Against the cold, tiny claws dug into the limestone. It looked at Oswin, tilted its head, then began pecking at something beneath the snow. A beetle, perhaps. A seed. Oswin watched it with the intensity of a starving man. The curve of its breast, the twitch of its wings, the shimmer of oiled black feathers, so alive in the pale light. His mouth watered. For a moment, a terrible image formed in his mind, the bird warm in his hands, the softness of its body, the brief, wet snap of bones, the imagined taste of blood, bright and hot in his mouth. He swallowed the thought like a burning coal. This is the devil's bait, he reminded himself, temptation dressed in feathers. He lowered his head again. In the absence of food, he had learned to consume thoughts, visions, memories. He remembered the day he entered the monastery. Rain on the roof tiles, a pair of boots left outside the dormitory door, the feel of the abbot's hand on his shoulder, heavy and calm. You will be reborn. Here, the abbot had said, you will forget the world. And for a time, he had. But forgetting didn't mean escaping. The world had a way of returning in the dark, in the shape of hunger, or a song from childhood that echoed through the cloisters in his dreams, in the memory of a girl's name he had not spoken in years, in the guilt of wanting more than broth, more than discipline, more than being unseen. He clenched the rosary in his hand until his palm stung. The blackbird flew off, leaving behind a scatter of disturbed snow. Above the monastery, the clouds shifted. A shaft of grey light touched the cloister arch, revealing the edge of the garden cross, buried nearly to the arms in snow. Oswin's breath slowed. This was the part he feared most, the moment after temptation, the waiting, the silence that did not comfort, the knowledge that he could endure another hour, and still not be holy. The hunger would not crown him with grace. It would not save him, but it might strip him down, far enough that something, anything, could enter the space that remained. He shifted, just barely, and pain sang through his knees. Still, he stayed. The bell did not ring for long. No brother came to check on him. The snow did not stop. The sky did not open. This was the true fast, not of food, but of answers. And Oswin, kneeling in white silence, whispered a prayer not from scripture, but from within. Let me not become hollow for nothing. Let the cold mean something. Let this silence not be the sound of being forgotten. He opened his eyes once more, slowly, a print in the snow. Bird's claw, three-toed, light, fleeting. It would be gone in an hour, buried. And so, would he be, if he failed to return? But to return meant stepping back into warmth, and shame. To stay meant freezing slowly beneath the watch of a God who did not speak. He remained not for glory, not for fear, but because the world outside these walls was louder, brighter, colder, in a different way. One where hunger was not a choice, and prayer was drowned in coin and noise and the unbearable weight of being seen. Here, in this silence, at least he could disappear with dignity, and if the snow covered him by morning, so be it. He would vanish beneath the white, and let the next chapter begin in the moment after the thaw. The hallway smelled of beeswax and damp stone, a scent that seemed soaked into the very bones of the abbey. It was the perfume of old winters, of silent decades, of prayers whispered until they wore holes in the air. Along the walls, soot climbed like ivy, the legacy of torches that had burned low through generations of monks long turned to dust. Brother Gervais walked slowly. Each step was deliberate, not by choice, but necessity. His body had grown reluctant, his legs stiff, his breath shallow, his belly hollowed into a shape he no longer recognized. He had not eaten in days, perhaps more. Time blurred when hunger curled around the edges of thought. The torchlight painted him in gold and shadow. Behind him, his silhouette clung to the wall, thin, stooped, more honest than the man himself. The shadow bore no secrets, no shame. It did not flinch at temptation. It did not fear judgment. But Gervais still did. They had said he was being tested. Before the tonsure, he had been a glutton, a drunkard, a man of loud rooms and louder sins. His hands had once known the curve of a cup more intimately than the pages of scripture. His tongue had tasted too much wine, flesh, indulgence. And so he had come here, seeking the fire that burns without consuming, the cleansing that left bones pure and spirits light. Fasting, prayer, mortification. And so he fasted, and so he prayed. And so he suffered. The abbey had not promised comfort, only silence, and the silence had not disappointed. Down the hall, laughter echoed, muffled and young. The novices, barely boys, were in the kitchens, preparing oatcakes for the bishop's visit. Their joy was cautious, but real, a flicker of warmth behind the stone. It traveled through the walls like heat from a dying fire. Gervais stopped outside the kitchen door. The scent reached him first, barley, rosemary, smoke. It slid through the gaps in the stone like a hand brushing his cheek. His stomach clenched. Not in pain, not anymore. That had passed days ago. This was deeper, older, the body remembering a comfort it no longer dared name. He swallowed air, slow and thin, as if the scent itself might fill him. But the old rule was clear: nothing must enter the mouth unless it fed the soul. Bread without blessing was sin. Food without hunger for God was filth. He stepped back into the dark. From the pocket of his robe he drew a small cloth, knotted and frayed. He untied it with trembling fingers. Inside was a scrap, the last piece of his mother's sleeve. Faded, blue linen, soft from years of touch. She had worn it the day he left, had tied it round his wrist and said nothing, only pressed her forehead to his chest. The cloth had seen every day of his penance. It reminded him of warmth, of touch, of a world before he became a shadow of a man trying to become something holy. He pressed it to his cheek, just once, then tucked it back away. The dormitory offered no comfort, only a blanket infested with lice and the sound of slow breathing. From the other beds, monks sleeping through hunger, monks dreaming of what they would not confess. He lay down and stared upward. The beams above were coated in dust, splintered at the edges. A web drifted slightly in the draught, swaying like a lantern on a ship. He imagined the spiders whispering in the night, telling stories to one another of monks, of ghosts, of men trying to starve the devil out of themselves, of hunger mistaken for holiness. He closed his eyes, but sleep did not come. A bell chimed the 9th hour. He did not rise. There was no strength left in ritual, no victory in standing when one's soul felt like it had sunk into the stone. The hunger had changed shape. It was no longer sharp. It was no longer a flame. It had become something gentler, a pressure, a fog, a whisper behind the ribs. He did not pray aloud, not anymore. His mouth was cracked, his lips split with cold and dryness. But within, the rhythm remained a chant, born not of Latin, but of pain transformed into purpose. His thoughts stumbled through fragments of psalms, old songs, a lullaby once sung over a cradle he barely remembered. A single bird called out from the rafters, a sudden sharp cry, then silence. Gervais smiled through cracked lips. It was not joy, not even hope. It was recognition, as if the bird had remembered him, as if it had come to perch for a moment on the edge of his suffering, and speak without words. "You are still here," and that was enough. He imagined the bird had come from Eden, or some older world where hunger did not sanctify, where bread was not bound in ritual, and water did not come with confession. Or perhaps it had come to offer escape, to say, "You need not stay. You are not bound. There is still a door." But the door had long since vanished. He had buried it beneath layers of ash and silence and prayer. He turned on his side, clutching the blanket around him. The lice crawled across his skin like tiny reminders of the body, insistent, unholy, proof that no matter how much he fasted, the flesh remained. The candle in the hall flickered low. The beeswax pooled at the base like melted gold. The flame leaned against the dark, stubborn but fading. He watched it, one breath, then another. That the hunger did not break him tonight, and that was its own kind of prayer. Tomorrow, perhaps, the bishop would speak of glory, of sacrifice, of holy men whose empty bellies made room for the Spirit, and the novices would nod, and Gervais would kneel, and none of them would speak of the bird in the rafters, or the rosemary in the air, or the cloth tied in secret against his heart. They would pretend the suffering was clean, that it was chosen. But Gervais knew better. It was not chosen. It was endured. And in the flicker of candlelight, as the shadows stretched long across the stone, he whispered one word, so soft, even the spiders might miss it. Still, still here, still hungry, still waiting. The veil between earth and heaven had never felt so thin. At the far edge of the cloister garden, beneath a crumbling statue of the Virgin Mary, whose face had long since eroded into a blank, weather-worn blur, a boy knelt in the dirt. His hands were buried in frozen soil. His name was Thomas. He was barely 16. Thin as the winter light, his bones seemed to rattle inside his skin with every gust of wind. His eyes had sunk deep into their sockets, as if they too were trying to hide from the cold. His lips were cracked, and his breath came out in wisps, vanishing into the snowy air like smoke from a dying fire. He had arrived at the monastery months ago, alone and voiceless. He carried nothing but a wax-sealed letter, written in a nobleman's hand, a letter that the abbot had read in silence, before folding it and locking it away in a chest. No one spoke the nobleman's name aloud. No one asked where Thomas had come from. In a world where names were power, silence was protection. They did not call him a novice. He had not been shorn or blessed or given a copy of the rule. He was a servant, a shadow. He swept the stone chapels, fed the pigs, scrubbed the floor beneath the altar with rags worn thin from years of contrition. He tended the garden, though nothing grew this season but frost, and today he fasted, not as a choice, but as punishment. He had stolen a single boiled egg, cold, meant for the infirmary. He had taken it while delivering firewood and eaten it in 3 bites behind the stables. He had not felt guilty, not until he was caught now. The brothers said he would learn the lesson of penance. He would find humility through hunger, holiness. On his knees, the herb bed had long since died. Only brittle stalks and shriveled leaves remained. He knelt beside it anyway, fingers scraping at the soil, now frozen hard like stone. The dirt tore at his skin, blood mixed with frost. Still, he dug, because he was told to, because refusing meant worse. Beside him sat a clay bowl, empty. That was all he was allowed today. A bowl with no food. A symbol, they said, a reminder, to eat with his eyes, to feast on dirt and silence. Snowflakes drifted gently down, clinging to his hair, his robe, his lashes. He did not brush them away, let them fall, let them melt and sting and freeze again. Pain was part of the learning. Cold was a kind of prayer. From inside the abbey, the sound of vespers drifted through the thick air, voices rising in Latin, sharp and elegant, like birds in flight. Tomas could not understand the words. They meant nothing to him, just sound, grand and distant, like a choir trapped behind a door he would never be allowed to open. He did not sing. He dug. In the black soil, something moved. A pale worm, cold and trembling, coiled in his palm. Life, even here. He watched it twitch. For a moment, he imagined it might speak, might whisper the secrets of the earth, the names of those buried deep beneath the roots, the prayers unspoken in the chapel above. But it said nothing. He let it go. The worm disappeared into the dirt, leaving behind nothing but the print of its body in his bloody hand. He turned his gaze to the chapel. In one high window, a single candle burned, small, faint, barely visible, a golden flicker against the gloom. The light did not warm him. It barely touched the edge of the garden. But he looked at it anyway, not with hope, not with habit. The hunger made everything circular. Thought folded into thought, morning into night, pain into ritual. The same shapes repeated, the same motions. He forgot how long he had been kneeling, how many flakes had fallen, how many cuts had opened. He only remembered the cold, and her. He reached out one hand, fingers shaking, and placed it gently on the stone foot of the Virgin. The statue's surface was rough, weathered by time and seasons. Moss clung to her hem. Her eyes were gone, her mouth erased by rain and wind. But still, she stood, watching. Somehow, Tomas leaned closer and whispered a single word. His mother's name. It fell from his lips like a secret, not loud, not even strong. Just breath and memory, and syllables nearly lost to time. The word dissolved in the air, caught by frost and silence, carried away before it could be heard by anything but the stone. He kept his hand there, not for comfort. There was none, but to remember that she had once held it, that once, long ago, he had been warm. His stomach growled, but he ignored it. Hunger was no longer sharp. It had dulled into something else, not quite pain, not quite emptiness, just presence. A second heart, beating quietly beneath the ribs. Inside. The brothers' chanting softened. Dusk settled over the cloister, and Tomas, still kneeling in the garden, watched the sky darken. Somewhere in the branches above, a crow called once, then silenced. On another hour passed. No one came for him. And so he stayed, hand on stone. Eyes on flame, mouth closed, waiting not for food, not even for forgiveness. But for the night to end, and for morning to come again, as it always did, indifferent, cold, and holy. The wind howled down from the moors, like a beast without a master. It found the narrow windows of the scriptorium, long slits of cold light, and swept through them with the sharpness of knives. Loose parchment flew into the air, fluttering across the stone floor like frightened birds. Brother Anselm rose to catch them. His hands trembled, not from the chill, but from hunger. The fast had entered its 7th day. He had spoken little, slept, lest his thoughts were slow, as if frozen in the marrow of his bones. Yet still he worked, each movement deliberate, each word copied with care, each breath a prayer. The others had warned him. Moderation, they said, Balance. Too much zeal turns holiness into pride. But Anselm had never believed in halfway things. He believed in ladders, and he believed suffering was the only way up, each rung carved in pain, each step a wound offered to the divine. He no longer remembered the taste of honey, or meat, or even bread, but he remembered the words of St. Aelred, "Only in the emptiness of the body does the fullness of God arrive." So he emptied himself, hour by hour, page by page. Ink stained his fingers deep black in the grooves of his skin, where no washing would reach. His knuckles were pale as bone, stretched tight, trembling. Before him lay a half-finished manuscript. Crucified Christ bled from open ribs, thorns biting deep into brow. The face was gaunt, the eyes hollow, beautiful, terrible. Anselm's vision blurred. He blinked, steadied the quill, and kept writing. Every letter had to be perfect. No smudges, no crooked lines. These words were not his, they were eternal. A monk's pride was not in creation, but in obedience, and to copy the holy books was the purest kind of submission. Silent, careful, devout. Behind him. Footsteps, soft, slow, then a pause. Brother Anselm did not turn his head. He did not need to. The abbot's presence was unmistakable, tall, quiet, heavy with judgment. He passed behind Anselm without a word, but he paused, just for a breath, then moved on. It was enough. No praise was spoken. None was needed. In this place, silence was the highest form of approval. A cup of broth sat on the edge of Anselm's desk, placed there some time during the night. Thin, steaming. The faint smell of garlic and bone rose in wisps toward his face. He had not touched it. He had not even moved it. A mercy, perhaps, or a test, or both. He stared at the cup as if it might speak to him, as if it might rise and whisper comfort, or betrayal, or absolution. The scent clawed at his resolve, but he turned back to the page. He dipped the quill, and wrote, "Hic est corpus meum, this is my body." He knew the irony. His own body, wasting, hollowing, becoming more spirit than flesh. He welcomed it. Outside the sun burned low, casting orange fire across the frosted windows. It looked like stained glass from the inside, wholly without effort, as if even the sun had knelt to pray. Above him, from a beam high in the rafters, a spider descended slowly, its silk gleaming in the dim light. It spun its web in silence, delicate, precise. Strand by strand. Anselm watched it, envious. There was a kind of purity in its labor. No thought, no glory, no doubt. The web did not question its form or purpose. It simply was. And when the dew came in the morning, it would hold it gently, shimmering, like relics in a reliquary. He dipped the quill again, not for himself, but for the God who demanded beauty even from the starving. The letters darkened, the text continued, and he was made flesh, ink for blood, parchment for flesh, hunger for grace. In the next room, a bell rang, the sound soft and distant. Time for prayer, time to rise. Anselm did not move. He prayed already. Every breath was a psalm, every tremor a hymn, every pain a petition. Somewhere behind the walls, the brothers prayed aloud for those who had fallen ill. The fever had returned, the winter sharp and unkind. Anselm did not join them. He prayed for them, with motion, with silence, with ink. The spider completed its spiral. The cup of broth cooled outside. The frost thickened. Inside, a monk gave himself away, line by line, letter by letter, until nothing remained but ink and faith. Candlelight danced across the infirmary walls, damp, cracked, and breathing with cold. It flickered against rows of straw beds, each holding the twisted shape of a man hovering between flesh and soul. The room smelled of fever. Sweet and sour, like spoiled milk and burnt wax. Brother Matthew knelt beside one of them, an elder monk, pale as moonlight, lips cracked, eyes fluttering beneath lids too thin to hide the pain. His breath came shallow. His belly was swollen, not from food, but from emptiness. They called it holy illness, a wasting, a surrendering of the body for the sake of the spirit. Some believed it a sacred gift, a sign that the soul was nearing perfection. Matthew no longer knew what he believed. He had seen too many eyes lose their light in the name of salvation, too many hands grow cold in pursuit of eternity. He pressed a damp cloth to the dying man's forehead. The fever pulsed through the skin, heat rising like smoke. The cloth had been dipped in melted snow. The only coolness left in the room, the stove in the corner burned low, its flame guarded like relics. Matthew's own hands were cracked, bruised. He had not slept in 2 nights. He had not eaten in 1. But this was his vow, to serve the dying, to walk beside them to the door, and whisper a psalm before they stepped. Through it was also his punishment, for doubts he had not spoken aloud, for hungers he could not name. A bell rang somewhere in the distance, once a single mournful chime, not for prayer, for death. He remembered the prior's command, feed the dying, only with the psalms, let them cross with clean mouths. But the man beside him whimpered, not for scripture, for honey. For figs, for bread, for something real. Something warm, something that did not rhyme. Matthew said nothing, he only held his hand. Outside, snow fell again, soft and ceaseless. It gathered on the chapel roof like ashes. Inside, time moved slowly, as if afraid to enter the next moment. Above the doorway, a wooden crucifix hung crooked, its edges worn smooth by centuries of desperate fingers. Matthew looked at it, not in reverence, but in searching for something he had long since lost the name for. The man beside him shuddered once, a sharp intake of breath, then stillness. Matthew bowed his head, and for the first time, in many months, he let the silence move through him, not like a prayer, but like a wound. A single tear slid down his cheek, not for the soul ascending, but for the hunger left behind, the ache in the belly, the silence in the bone, the questions unanswered by scripture or song. He did not reach for the psalter. He did not open his mouth to recite rehearsed verses. Instead, he whispered a final prayer, slow, quiet, unfinished. Not from memory. But from mourning. The rain came without warning. Heavy, sudden, inevitable. It struck the monastery stones with a sound like quiet weeping, endless and patient. Garden paths dissolved into mud. Water traced the grooves of saints carved in weathered stone. Beneath the storm, cloaked figures hurried across the courtyard, hoods drawn, sandals slipping. But Brother Luke did not move. He stood alone beneath the eaves of the cloister, hood down, face bare, eyes turned skyward, letting it fall. The rain, the weight, the waiting. He had broken the fast. Only once, a crust of bread, stolen from the kitchens in the blackest hour of night, still warm when he found it, still fragrant, still human. And now, he waited, not for forgiveness, for consequence. The rule was, clear. Hunger was a gate, a test, a flame to pass through. To step away from it, even once, was to turn from the divine. The abbot would call it weakness, cowardice. The brothers would not meet his gaze. But Luke, he could not lie. Not to God, not to himself. He was starving, ribs sharp beneath his robe, like branches cracking under winter snow. His thoughts scattered, his prayers dry as dust, repeated shapes without breath. And worst of all, the silence, that heavy, sacred silence, which once felt holy, now only felt hollow. The eaves above him dripped like a leaking chalice, and still he waited. He reached into the wide sleeve of his robe, hands trembling, and drew out the crust. What was left of it? Soggy, crumbling, dissolving. It sat in his palm like a small sin, no longer nourishing, just proof of frailty. A raven landed on the cloister wall, black eyes, blacker wings, watching. Luke looked at it, a sentinel in feathers. He extended the bread. The bird took it without hesitation, no judgment, no fear, just need. He felt no relief. No lightning bolt of guilt, no flood of grace, only quiet. Inside the chapel, the chant began again. Latin verses, lifted toward heaven, rising from throats like mist off damp wood. Luke turned away from the raven, away from the chapel. He walked slowly back across the garden, his sandals sinking deep into the wet soil. Every step a question, every breath a confession. He would go to the gatehouse. He would speak, not to be cleansed, not to be punished, but to be heard. He would say, I am not holy. I was hungry. I was afraid. I chose bread. And maybe, just maybe, in the silence that followed, something would answer. Not with fire, not with thunder, but with something smaller, gentler, understanding. Because even now, even soaked, ashamed, and trembling, Luke still believed, not in perfection, but in mercy. Even hunger, he thought, might carry its own kind of grace.